Hi, so I am going to do a quick rundown of each of the individual pods as well as the hub that you can use with the code jumper. Starting off with the hub, the object in front of me is the hub. It consists of a large white block. There are 4 holes located at the bottom that are headphone jacks. There is a rounded blue ridged wheel up at the top. There is a center area with a series of holes in it that is going to be our speaker, as well as 2 buttons. The larger button is going to have a triangle on it. That is going to be our play button. And then we have a smaller button that is going to be our square, which is a stop button. The dial at the top, the ridged dial, is going to count as our volume. It also is going to function as our on-off. If you spin it just a little bit towards the left, you will hear a click. That means it is on. If you continue spinning towards the left, it is then going to get louder. If you spin it to the right, it will get quieter until it turns off. If you press the play button, it will run all of the code that you have connected to the to the hub. On the other hand, if you press the square stop button, it will stop whatever code is running. If, however, you press both the play and stop button at the same time, it will, instead of playing the code itself, it will read the code aloud based off of what play pods you have connected. The individual headphone jacks are where you're going to connect each of your PlayPod strings. They are labeled from left to right: thread 1, thread 2, thread 3, thread 4. When you press the play button, all 4 threads will start playing at the same time if they are plugged in. As a reminder, that is the hub. The next pod that we're going to introduce is going to be one of our main pods. This is the play pod. It is white on top, blue on the bottom. On the left-hand side of the pod is the wire. This is going to be the connection wire that plugs into either another play pod or the play hub to connect our code. On the right-hand side is going to be a hole, which is our headphone jack. That is where the code will continue after this play pod has been used. On top of the play pod, there are 2 different dials. One of them is a larger, round, flat donut with ridges that go up and down. The other dial is going to be a slightly taller circular dial that have ridges that go left to right. The dial that we're going to call our flat donut dial is the one that allows you to control the sound that you are playing. The taller dial, which we're going to call our raised dial, is what allows you to control the speed at which the sound is played. Both the donut dial as well as the raised dial have a headphone jack in the center that we can use to add plugs, which I will go over later. The next pod that we're going to go over is going to be our stop pod. The stop pod is a orangish red on the bottom and white on top. The pod is also known by only having one single dial on top that is raised. This dial is going to have its ridges going left to right. There is a wire, which is where you connect to other play pods. On the left, there is also a hole on the right-hand side, which is your headphone jack to continue your code. The raised dial is on the right-hand side of the stop pod, and when we twist that raised dial, it will control how long the code is paused for. Next up, we are going to work with the loop pod. The loop pod is going to have is white on top, yellow on bottom, and it consists of one flat, rounded, donut-style dial. This one has small divots located on top of it, as opposed to those ridges from the play pod. There are going to be two wires that come out of this loop pod. One wire is going to be short. This is the wire that we use to connect to our strings of code. It is what you will connect to the other pods. The wire just shortly beneath that is going to be a longer wire. This wire is going to consist of part of our loop. On the right-hand side of the pod, you will feel that there are two holes. The far right-hand side is going to have our headphone jack that allows us to continue the code. The headphone jack that is on the bottom of the device, the lower edge of it, that is directly next to the long wire, is going to be the start of our loop. Any play pod that we connect here is going to be the start of our loop. Our loop will continue until we connect the end of that string with the long wire that is on the left-hand side. So we will be circling from the right to the left. The dial itself that is on top of the loop pod determines how many loops that we are going to take between the numbers of 0 and 8. The next two pods that we're going to go over come in a pair. That consists of the selection pod and the merge pod. The selection pod can be identified by being green on the bottom and white on top. It also has two dials on top of it. These two dials are not circular, they instead have square blocks coming out of the side of them. The dial on the left is going to have two square blocks coming out of the side. The dial on the right is going to have three square blocks coming out of the side. There is a singular wire coming up out of the top, which is what we used to connect to earlier lines of our code. There are also two holes on the bottom, which are our headphone jacks, that will connect onto further lines of code. This selection pod is going to act as an if-else statement. This allows us to choose which path we want to take out of our two bottom headphone jacks. If the dials themselves allow us to pick a number between 0 and 8 whenever you twist them. If the number on the left, which uses the 2 square dial, if that number is larger, we will take the left path. If we have the number on the right, which is controlled by the 3 square dial, if that number is larger, we will take the path on the right. Whenever you use a selection pod, you are then going to need to follow it up with a merge pod. The merge pod is the only pod that does not have any dials on it at all, and it has two wires that come out the top. It is green on the bottom of it and white on top, and there are the two short wires. These short wires are going to connect into the two separate paths that we led out of our selection pod. All this does is it allows us to merge our two selection paths that we had from our selection pod into a singular path again that we can continue onward with. Those are a majority of the pods that we'll be using throughout Code Jumper. To follow that up, there are one last extra set of devices that can be used with Code Jumper, and those are going to be the plugs. The plugs come in two forms. One of them is a purple, shorter plug that has various symbols on the top, and then one of them is going to be a taller, gray plug that has a headphone jack on the top and not a symbol. For each of the purple plugs, there are a couple different varieties. Each purple plug represents a number. These numbers come in a couple different varieties. If there is a pip or little bulb on the top of the plug, that is going to be a constant. These constants come in the numbers 1 through 8. And they can each be identified by the number of little bumps that are on top of them. There's also a pair of plugs, one that has a plus on it and one that has a minus on it. When these plugs are used, they will increment whatever value they are attached to by 1, or they will decrease whatever value they are attached to by 1. We also have another plug that has an R on top of it. This is the random plug. Anytime this plug is used, it will provide a random number between 1 and 8. And then finally, we have our infinite plug. This is primarily going to be used for our loop, as it will continue on forever and allow us to run an endless loop. The gray plug is known as our variable plug. Any number that gets plugged into this pod can then be set up to be used as a variable. Anytime you use another gray variable plug later down the line, it will use the same number that was last put in one of the earlier plugs. To use any of the plugs, you can grab one of the various pods that have dials on them. Each dial has a headphone jack in it. By taking one of these plugs and putting it into that headphone jack, you can set what the specific value of that dial is. I think I'm done. Am I missing anything?